The day my world was stolen, I hadn't expected a parade or even a welcome home sign. After 8 months in the Middle East, I knew better than to hope for ticker tape and hugs. I just wanted to sit in my living room, pour myself a quiet drink, and let the silence of my small Vermont cabin wash over me. I wanted peace. But instead, I found a stranger's car in the driveway, a padlock on the front door, and a realtor's sign on the lawn with the words "sold" in thick red lettering. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. Sunstroke, maybe, or the haze of jet lag playing tricks on me. I stepped out of the cab and just stared. The garden I had planted before I left, gone. The American flag I used to hang from the porch railing, missing. Even the wind chimes my grandfather gave me after my promotion had vanished. I pounded on the door. A woman answered. Young, mid-20s, hair pulled into a tight bun. She looked startled, then confused, then concerned. "I'm sorry, can I help you?" she asked. I blinked. "This is my house." Her brows pulled together. I bought this place 2 months ago from the Wells family." The name hit me like a backhand. The Wells family, my last name. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, blood roaring in my ears, until she gently closed the door. It took another 3 hours, one visit to the town clerk's office, and a full-blown breakdown in the parking lot before the truth settled in like acid. They sold my house, my family, without my knowledge, without my consent, without even a damn phone call. The deed had been signed over by my father acting under something called power of attorney. Apparently, they'd submitted paperwork stating I was indefinitely deployed and mentally unstable, unable to manage my own affairs. It was all done legally, efficiently, coldly. Every piece of furniture, every journal, every uniform I left behind, gone. That night, I didn't sleep. I rented a cheap motel room 3 towns over and lay on a scratchy bed, staring at a stained ceiling. My duffel bag was still zipped, my boots still on. I couldn't cry, couldn't scream. All I could do was play it over in my mind again and again, like a reel stuck on loop. My mother's voice on the answering machine 3 months ago. "Hope you're well, sweetie. Things are moving along here." My sister's email. "If you're not going to be around, you really shouldn't leave loose ends, you know?" Loose ends. I was a decorated military officer, a daughter, a sister. I had sent gifts from every deployment, remembered every birthday, attended every damn family Zoom call I could. Always in uniform, always smiling, always trying. But none of it mattered. I was a loose end. The next morning, I tried calling my mother, straight to voicemail. I tried my sister. She picked up, and when I said hello, there was a pause, then a sigh. "Jennifer, you weren't supposed to be back yet. Not welcome home, not we're sorry, just that. You weren't supposed to be back yet." And that was when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. That was the day my world was stolen. Not by enemy fire, not by a roadside bomb, but by the very people who were supposed to love me the most. And in that motel room, still smelling of mildew and regret, I promised myself something. I wouldn't fight them with fists. I wouldn't waste tears. I would rise, not for revenge, for truth. When blood turned its back, I always believed that family was the one place in the world where I didn't have to earn my worth, where being born into their name, their legacy, their love was enough. But that belief shattered the year I turned 17. It didn't happen all at once, not like an explosion or a slap in the face. No. It was slower, quieter, the kind of pain that trickles in like rain through a cracked window until one day You realize the whole floor beneath you has rotted. The first fracture came during dinner. It was my last night at home before leaving for Marine boot camp. I'd passed the ASVAB with a near-perfect score. I'd trained every morning before school for months, running in freezing dawn light, lifting weights in silence while the rest of the house slept. I had even declined a full art scholarship to enlist. It was the first decision I made completely for me. That night, I wore my freshly ironed button-down, hair pulled back, face scrubbed clean. I thought we'd celebrate, even if just over meatloaf and mashed potatoes. But as usual, the focus of the meal was Claire, my younger sister, the radiant one, the one who somehow turned existing into a spotlight-worthy act. She had just returned from her design internship in Manhattan. She talked about gallery openings, luxury brands, the impossible stress of getting cappuccinos for her boss's dog. My mother hung on every word. My father nodded approvingly, as if her exaggerated stories were gospel. I waited. I'd cleared my throat. I even tried to slide my enlistment papers across the table, hoping they'd ask. They didn't. Finally, I said it out loud. I'll leave for basic next week. My father didn't even blink. My mother offered a tight smile. Are you sure you've thought this through, Jane? The military isn't really artistic? Claire laughed behind her wine glass. Yeah, she'll last, 3 weeks before she's crying in the dirt? My heart sank. I had wanted them to be proud. I had wanted just a nod, a pat on the shoulder, something. But they looked at me like I'd announced I was joining a traveling circus. You've always been dramatic, my mother added. We just don't want you to throw your life away on a phase. A phase? They thought my decision, my dream, was a phase. Meanwhile, they spent thousands funding Claire's fashion school ambitions, even after she dropped out twice. That was the first time I felt the split in my chest. The first time I realized I wasn't just the second daughter, I was the wrong daughter. But the real betrayal, the one that left a scar, came after I left. At boot camp, I wrote letters home every Sunday, handwritten, careful, raw. I told them about my training, the exhaustion, the pride I felt pushing past what I thought were my limits. I enclosed photos. I asked how they were doing. I never got a single reply, but I didn't let it break me. What did break me was the moment I got injured during a field exercise and was sent to the infirmary. As I lay in the cot, wrist in a splint, I asked the nurse if she could call my emergency contact. I hadn't heard from them in months. Maybe they'd be worried. She came back 15 minutes later, eyes cautious. I spoke to your parents. They said, and I quote, Jane is an adult. She knows what she signed up for. She hesitated. They hung up after that. I didn't speak for the rest of the day. When I graduated from boot camp, top 5 in my company, I stood on that parade field under the scorching sun, or chest burning with pride and ache. Everyone else had family waiting at the finish line. Balloons, hugs, photos. I stood alone. Even my drill instructor noticed. No one here for you, Maddox? He asked, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. I shook my head. No, sir. He didn't say anything, just gave me a nod that meant more than any word ever could. After graduation, I sent one last package home. Inside was a photo of me in uniform, a small medal tucked into the corner, and a short note that said, I made it. It was returned, unopened. That night, I walked to the edge of the barracks, sat beneath the stars, and felt something inside me die. Not hope, not yet. But the version of me who believed that love, real love, could not be revoked. That version didn't survive. Over the years, I still reached out. I called on birthdays, mailed postcards from every country I was stationed in. I sent Claire a bracelet from Turkey, a hand-painted vase for my mother from Seoul, a rare vintage watch from a market in Berlin for my dad. Nothing ever came back. The mailbox remained empty. The phone stayed silent. Every attempt was swallowed by a black hole named family. But I kept sending things anyway, not because I believed they'd answer, but because I still wanted to believe I was worth remembering. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was late fall. I had just finished my second deployment. Dust still clung to my boots, exhaustion in every joint. I was sitting in a diner off Route 19, sipping burnt coffee when a stranger sat beside me and said, "Are you Jane Maddox?" I turned, wary. "My wife's friends with your mom," he said. "She mentioned your family sold your house, said you went, a little off after the war." My stomach dropped. "What?" "Yeah, said they had to take over your finances. Something about mental breakdowns, PTSD, that kind of thing." He kept talking, but I didn't hear another word. My family didn't just abandon me. They rewrote me. They made me disappear and left behind a version of me so broken, so twisted, that no one would dare ask questions. That was the moment when blood officially turned its back on me. I walked out of that diner into the cold wind, heart thudding like war drums in my chest. I looked up at the pale sky and whispered 4 words I never thought I'd say. "They've declared war first." The silence that almost ended me. There's a kind of loneliness that no one talks about. It doesn't come from being alone in a room. It comes from being erased from the one place you thought you belonged. That's the silence that found me after I learned what my family had done. Not just abandoning me, not just selling my house, but rewriting my entire identity like I was a stain they were desperate to scrub out. For weeks, I drifted. I couldn't go back to base. My deployment was officially over, and I had no housing. I couldn't call friends. I'd always kept people at arm's length, afraid of being too much. I had no couch to crash on, no key to any door that still welcomed me. Every step I took felt like walking through fog, heavy and grey. I rented a room in a low-cost extended stay on the outskirts of town, the kind with flickering lights and water-stained ceilings. I paid in cash and stopped checking my phone. There was no one to call. I spent my days walking, just walking. Miles and miles through forgotten streets, past shuttered storefronts and cheap gas stations, my boots worn down to the soles. I avoided mirrors. I skipped meals. I didn't want to be seen, not by strangers, not by myself. One evening, after another endless loop of silent wandering, I returned to the motel and found an envelope slipped under my door. No stamp, just my name written in sharp, elegant cursive. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, "We didn't mean to hurt you, but we had to move forward. Please don't contact us anymore. Claire." I stared at the words until they blurred. Not, "We're sorry," not, "Come home." Just an efficient little dismissal, as if I were a package they forgot to forward. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the pistol in my bag. Military issue, cleaned, loaded. I don't know how long I sat there. Time became this fluid thing, no minutes, no hours, just breath and weight and the steady tick of the cheap plastic wall clock. I held the gun in my lap, not out of impulse, but out of resignation. I wasn't crying. I wasn't panicking. I was simply tired. I thought of all the medals in the storage unit I couldn't access anymore, all the postcards I sent that no one kept, all the moments I had sacrificed, hoping it might one day be enough to earn a seat at the table again. It never was. And then something strange happened. I looked down at my hands, scarred, calloused, tough from years of work, training, deployment. These hands had pulled people from burning vehicles. These hands had held the trembling fingers of a dying soldier. These hands had written final letters for comrades who never got to go home, and I thought they deserve better than this. I put the pistol away. I stood up. I turned on the faucet and let cold water run over my wrists until I could feel the sting, the aliveness, the presence of me. I made it through that night, not because I found hope, but because I found anger. Not the loud kind, not the kind that breaks things, but the quiet kind. The cold, sharpened steel of resolve. The next morning, I shaved my face, ironed my last clean shirt, and walked to a nearby VA center. I didn't say much, just asked for help getting temporary housing. The man behind the desk looked up at me with surprise, then nodded. "Let's get you squared away, Mom." It was the first time in weeks anyone had looked me in the eye. Over the following days, I took baby steps. I secured a new P.O. box. I opened a fresh checking account with what little I had left. I called a former commanding officer just to hear a familiar voice. Every night, I fought off the shadows that tried to pull me back under, but every morning I rose again. And slowly, so slowly, I didn't notice it at first, I started to breathe. But make no mistake, I didn't forgive. I didn't forget. That's not how survival works. Because the thing about nearly falling off the edge is, when you pull yourself back, you see the world differently. You start measuring things in truth, not appearances, in loyalty, not blood, in intention, not obligation. And I knew with clarity that felt like oxygen in my lungs that I was done being erased. They wanted me silent. They wanted me gone. But now I was still here, and I was no longer playing defense. Steel beneath the ruin. People think healing comes in a straight line. You fall, you hurt, you cry, then one day you rise. But that's not how it happens. Healing is jagged. Some days you stand tall, some days you collapse, and some days, if you're lucky, you find something buried under the rubble, something you forgot was ever yours. For me, it started with a list, a blank page, a black pen, a single word written at the top. Rebuild. Not revenge. Not rage. Rebuild. I didn't want to burn them to the ground. I didn't want drama or spectacle. I just wanted to take back what was mine, my dignity, my voice, my future. I wanted to start again. But this time with armor forged from truth, not illusion. The first name I wrote down was a woman named Maya Carlton. She had served beside me during a joint operations deployment in Djibouti. A cyber intelligence officer turned private investigator, one of the sharpest minds I had ever met. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but when I called, she picked up on the second ring. "Jane," she said, "it's been a long time. What do you need?" I told her everything, in measured, military tone. No dramatics, just facts. She didn't interrupt, didn't pity me. When I finished, she was quiet for a beat. Then she said, "Let's get to work." That was the beginning. Maya helped me track every transfer, every forged document. We discovered that over a span of 5 years, Claire had funneled more than $480,000 from my accounts, cloaked in slow, incremental withdrawals made while I was deployed overseas. It wasn't just the money, it was how surgical the betrayal had been. Fake signatures. Digital authorizations on my behalf. Power of attorney filed behind my back during my second tour. They had sold my home using forged consent forms, all filed neatly by Claire, submitted by a lawyer she had seduced into loyalty. I felt sick reading through the evidence, but Maya wasn't shaken. They were sloppy, she said. They got cocky, and they left fingerprints. By week 3, I had boxes of data, statements, receipts, email threads. Maya even dug up internal texts from Claire's former assistant. One message read, "Don't worry, Jane won't even notice until it's too late." They underestimated me. Everyone always had. So I used that. While Maya worked on the financial side, I focused on myself. I moved into a small apartment, no bigger than a supply closet, one window, one bed, but it was mine. I started running again, 5 miles at dawn, just like I used to before my first deployment. Not because I needed the cardio, but because I needed the ritual, the sweat, the structure. I dusted off old notebooks and began writing daily logs, memories, pieces of my life I had long buried under survival. I even enrolled in night classes in business ethics and estate law, using my veterans education benefits. I wanted to understand what had been taken from me, legally, emotionally, systematically, and I wanted to know how to never let it happen again. But most of all, I wanted leverage. Because what they stole wasn't just money, it was identity, legacy, reputation. Claire had painted a version of me, unstable, erratic, incapable, and people had believed her, neighbors, family friends, even old colleagues. So I built something stronger than a rebuttal. I built a record. Maya helped me compile a portfolio, not just of the fraud, but of who I actually was. Commendations from the Marine Corps, letters from commanding officers, photos of service, footage from ceremonies where I stood in full uniform as the national anthem played in the background. I collected testimonials, real ones, from soldiers I served with, families I helped evacuate, women I mentored overseas, people who saw me, not through the filter of a bitter sister, but with the eyes of truth. And slowly, something hardened inside me. Not bitterness, not hatred, something better, steel. I wasn't the girl begging to be loved anymore. I was the woman building a war room. One night, I sat at my desk staring at my reflection in the dark window. I barely recognized myself. My shoulders were broader now, not from lifting weights, but from carrying silence, shame, and now, strategy. My eyes weren't sad anymore, they were sharp. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need to expose them to the world to feel whole. I just needed to expose them to themselves. Let them look into a mirror they couldn't shatter. Let them see me. See what they chose to erase and what came roaring back from the void. But it had to be done on my terms. So I began planning the return. Not a homecoming, not a confrontation, a reclamation of what they stole, of what they tried to destroy, and of the person I had become without them. They wanted me forgotten. But I was about to become unignorable. The ghost returns. Home. When people talk about returning home, they picture nostalgia, familiar smells, creaky floorboards, old photographs. They talk about it like a warm memory wrapped in a blanket of sentiment. But for me, home was not a place. It was a battlefield, and when I returned, it wasn't as a daughter or a sister. It was as a ghost, and I had unfinished business. It had been nearly 3 years since I last stood in front of my childhood home. The white brick was still pristine, the flower beds too perfectly arranged. Claire's new Mercedes sat in the driveway, its chrome trim glinting under the afternoon sun. A neatly engraved sign at the gate read, "The Wells Estate, established 1983. My name nowhere in sight. I wasn't Jane Wells anymore, not to them, but they didn't know that the woman approaching the door now was Jane Maddox, reconstructed, reborn, rearmed. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't need to. They were hosting one of their Sunday gatherings, the kind Claire used to document online. A curated mix of local dignitaries, country club elites, and family acquaintances. My return was timed for maximum precision. I walked through the side gate, my heels clicking sharply on the slate path. The same backyard where Claire once hosted her Sweet 16 was now set up with white folding chairs and a champagne bar. Laughter floated across the air, and I moved through the crowd like smoke, unnoticed at first. the kind of invisible that only comes with confidence. Then someone saw me, and silence, sudden and thick, spread like a stain. Claire was the first to react. She blinked twice, head tilting in that signature way she had when calculating next moves. "Jane," she said, voice clipped. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Not Jane, Ms. Maddox, but thank you for the warm welcome." My mother turned from her conversation, wineglass half lifted. Her jaw tightened. My father froze, his hand still outstretched to shake someone else's. And me? I stood still, letting the discomfort bloom in the air around them. I was dressed in a black wool coat, civilian clothes, sharp and unassuming, a delicate chain around my neck holding my officer's insignia in miniature. Nothing flashy, but nothing forgettable. "I'm not here for long," I said, addressing them all. "Just passing through, thought I'd say hello, catch up." Claire stepped forward, smile brittle. "This is surprising." "I imagine it is," I said, letting my eyes meet hers. "I would have sent a card, but, well, addresses change." Someone coughed. Another person, an older woman I didn't recognize, leaned toward Claire and whispered, "Is that your sister? The one from the Marines?" Claire flinched. It was perfect. She wanted to hide me. Had spent years erasing me from every narrative, every family gathering, every legacy. And now I was right here, smiling, visible, unapologetic. My father tried to salvage the moment. "Well, what brings you back?" "Business," I said evenly. "I'm handling some affairs." "Yeah." Sorting out a few discrepancies in past transactions. I let the words hang there, heavy with implication. Maya Carlton sends her regards. His face paled. Claire's lips parted slightly. My mother set down her wineglass and finally spoke. "We didn't expect you." "I know," I said. "You never do." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse or shout. That would have been too easy, too expected. No, what I gave them was worse. I gave them composure. It unsettled them. "I'd love to stay longer," I said, glancing at the stunned crowd, "but I have a meeting with a probate attorney in half an hour. You know how it is. Paperwork never ends." As I turned to leave, I paused. "Oh, and Claire, you might want to check your emails. Some documentation should have arrived by now. Legal stuff. Not urgent, yet." Her throat bobbed. She didn't speak. I walked away. Every step was steady, controlled. A march, not a retreat. That night, back at my rented loft downtown, I received the first email from her. A vague message asking to talk privately, laced with faux warmth and shallow concern. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened a bottle of scotch, the good kind, sat by the window, watched the city blink alive. They knew now. They knew I wasn't gone. They knew I wasn't powerless. And they had no idea what was coming next. Because my return wasn't about confronting them with fury. It was about showing them what unbreakable looked like. It was about letting the ghost walk through the house they thought she'd never see again, and watching them realize she never died. She just learned how to become someone they couldn't touch. To the table, where I wasn't welcome. It was a Tuesday morning when I got the invitation, hand-delivered. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering embossed with perfect cursive that made my stomach churn. "You are cordially invited to the Wells Family Appreciation Brunch, honoring community, legacy, and family values." Family values. I nearly laughed. It was Claire's doing. No doubt a PR stunt. An image-polishing, reputation-fortifying gathering before her next big feature in some lifestyle magazine. The kind of event where she could parade around in cream linen and talk about overcoming hardships with a flute of champagne in hand. And yet, the invitation had my name on it. My real name. Not Jane, not Ms. Maddox, but Captain Jane Wells. They were trying to reclaim me because now the world knew I existed. And more importantly, the world was starting to ask questions. The last 2 weeks had been a quiet storm. I hadn't said anything publicly, but a few targeted legal filings had become visible on state records. I made sure of it. Requests for property transfers, inquiries into power of attorney fraud, questions about inheritance discrepancies. Claire's assistant had quit abruptly. A distant cousin texted me out of the blue. "Are you okay? I heard something weird about your old house." It was working. They were losing control of the narrative. And now they were inviting me to brunch. They didn't want to welcome me. They wanted to contain me. I went, not because I needed validation, but because sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a secret. It's a seat at the table they never thought you'd occupy again. I arrived early, deliberately. The event was at a local vineyard, expansive, manicured, obnoxiously expensive. White tents billowed in the breeze. Servers in black vests bustled quietly, placing centerpieces of white peonies and lavender. Claire was overseeing details, clipboard in hand. Her dress was pale pink, fitted perfectly. She turned and saw me, and for just a flicker of a second the mask cracked. Then she smiled. "Jane," she said, voice silk-wrapped steel. "You came." I walked past her without replying. She didn't follow. Inside the main tent, I found my seat easily. It was at the far end of the head table, not central, but visible, strategic, far enough away to minimize threat, close enough to photograph. I sat, back straight, hands folded. Guests began arriving, familiar faces, community leaders, old neighbors, family friends who hadn't spoken to me in years. Some stared, some nodded politely, some avoided eye contact altogether. My father approached. He wore a navy suit, the tie I bought him a decade ago, still in good condition. He sat beside me, just for a moment. "This is a big day for Claire," he said. "Try not to make it about you." I turned to him, met his eyes. "I never wanted it to be about me," I said. "You made sure of that." He looked away. The event began. Claire gave the opening speech. She thanked the community, the guests. She praised the values passed down through generations. She said our family had always believed in honor, integrity, and service. She said those words, honor, integrity, service, without irony. Then she announced a donation to a local veterans group. She looked at me when she said it. Applause rippled across the tent. She gestured to me. And of course, none of this would feel complete without acknowledging my sister, Captain Jane Wells, a dedicated Marine and someone I've always looked up to. Lies. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I simply said, "It's Lieutenant Colonel now." The tent fell quiet. Claire blinked. The air tensed. Someone dropped a fork. I stood slowly, calm and deliberate, walked to the microphone she had just stepped away from. I didn't plan to speak, but I spoke. "Thank you," I began, "for the generous invitation. I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome at a table I was once locked out of, but here I am." Silence. I let it stretch. Then, "It's been brought to my attention that there's some confusion about legacy, about family, about what it means to serve." My voice didn't shake. It cut. I was overseas while my family made decisions about my property, my finances, my name. I was busy saving lives while my inheritance was quietly funneled into designer handbags and trust funds I didn't authorize. Gasps. Eyes widened. I looked at my mother. Her hand trembled on her wine glass. I looked at my father. His face had gone red. I looked at Claire, and she smiled, not with joy, with threat, but it was thin, hollow, desperate. I won't go into detail here, I continued. That's what courtrooms are for. But I will say this. Legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn. I stepped back. People didn't clap, they stared. And Claire? She stood completely still, fingers white around her wine stem. The rest of the brunch passed like a wake. I didn't eat, I didn't drink, but I stayed. Because power isn't always about speaking. Sometimes power is presence. That night, I returned home to find an envelope slid under my door. Inside was a check. $500,000, unsigned, no note, no apology, just one final insult dressed as generosity. I ripped it in half. Because I hadn't come for hush money, I came for the truth. And that was just beginning to surface. The documents. They never thought I'd find truth has a way of hiding in plain sight until you're willing to look hard enough. My family had spent years crafting their version of events. They made me the unreliable one, the distant one, the sister who left and never looked back. But the thing about lies is, the more you repeat them, the more careless you become. And Claire, God bless her meticulous arrogance, left fingerprints everywhere. It started with a single slip. During that miserable brunch between speeches and champagne toast, I overheard her speaking with a man in a grey pinstripe suit. Older, soft-spoken, the kind of man you wouldn't notice in a crowd. But I noticed the words trust revision and asset shift come out of her mouth. And I knew. She wasn't just covering her tracks. She was still moving pieces. After that, I doubled down. Maya and I met every morning at a co-working space downtown. No distractions, no windows, just facts, files, and the kind of determination only betrayal can fuel. She had started digging through probate records, land titles, and sealed agreements, things most people wouldn't even know how to request. But I had the one thing that cracked open every locked drawer: legal standing. I was Harold Wells's granddaughter, and unbeknownst to Claire, I was still the sole legal beneficiary of his estate. They'd filed a corrected will months after his death, one that conveniently left everything to my parents: the vineyard, the house, the investments. But the document had inconsistencies, pages that didn't match, witness signatures that didn't line up, and most damning of all, the notary had been dead for 2 years. Forgery. Claire's golden empire rested on a lie that had an expiration date, and it had just come due. Maya said nothing when she showed me the evidence. She just slid the folder across the table and let me read in silence. Inside were bank statements. Dozens of transfers from my grandfather's accounts to a private LLC Claire had formed 2 months before his passing. An account labeled H. Wells Trust Reserve. Only it wasn't a trust. It was a laundering funnel. I stared at the numbers, line after line, dollar after dollar. She funneled almost $2.3 million out of his accounts, Maya said quietly, started before he even died, which means she was doing it while he was still alive, I finished, while he was sick. My stomach turned. I remembered visiting him that winter. His mind had been fading, but when I placed my hand over his, he looked at me like I was the only person left in the world he recognized. I remembered how he'd pulled me close and whispered, "Don't trust them." You know who I mean. Now I did. Claire hadn't just stolen from me. She'd stolen from him too. The next day, I drove out to the house he had left to me, the one they'd claimed for themselves, the one with the porch swing and the garden he used to water at dusk. I hadn't been there since the funeral. I parked 2 houses down, walked up the gravel path. The house was quiet, Claire wasn't home, but my key still worked. Inside, the air smelled like old wood and new paint. They'd tried to renovate, tried to erase his presence, but it was still there, in the floors he laid himself, in the lopsided shelves, in the faint scent of pipe tobacco. I moved through each room with reverence and rage. In his old study, I found it, a box labeled in his handwriting, Jane, for when it matters. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were photocopies of legal documents, handwritten notes, a USB drive, and a letter addressed to me. Kiddo, if you're reading this, it means things didn't go the way I hoped, but I know you. You'll survive it. You always have. This is yours, all of it. I never trusted them to do right by you. I only regret that I didn't say that to your face more often. Don't let them take what's yours. You've earned more than they'll ever understand. Love, Granddad. I pressed the letter to my chest, breathed, swallowed the lump in my throat like it was a stone. The USB drive contained emails between Claire and the lawyer who had falsified the revised will. She'd paid him under the table. He'd since been disbarred. Quietly, of course. Claire had a talent for making problems disappear. But not this time. I left the house before anyone saw me, walked away like a thief in reverse, stealing back the truth that was always mine. That night, I filed a motion with the county court to contest the will. Attached every piece of evidence, named every account. Every transfer, every lie. And I CC'd Claire on the email. No note, no warning, just the truth. I expected silence. Instead, she called. It was nearly midnight. My phone buzzed once, twice. I let it ring. Then I picked up. Her voice was sharp, controlled. That same forced elegance she always used when she was afraid. You're making a mistake, she said. No, I replied. You did. Years ago. Think about what you're doing. You'll tear the family apart. There is no family. She went quiet. Then she said, You don't understand the pressure I've been under. You left. You don't know what it's been like. That's when I laughed. Cold. Real. You stole from a dying man, from your sister, and you think you're the victim? Another pause. Then finally she said something I never expected. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I closed my eyes, let the words settle like dust. Too late, I whispered, then I hung up. Because some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. And this time, I wasn't waiting for permission to walk away. I was walking through. The apologies that came. Too late. The court date was announced, I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. It had taken months to get here, months of digging, of waiting, of replaying every moment I had once tried to forget them. But now it was official. The Wells family trust, the estate, the forged documents, the stolen funds, everything would be brought into the light. Claire tried to delay it, of course. Filed motions, stalled, offered settlements in private, first through her lawyer, then in desperation through our mother. I still remember the voicemail, her voice strained like a violin string stretched too tight. Jane, it's your mother. We just want to resolve this quietly. You've made your point. Please don't humiliate the family. Humiliate the family, as if they hadn't done that themselves, as if I was the one who should feel ashamed for surviving them. I didn't respond. Let them stew in silence. The apology came a week later. Claire showed up unannounced outside the VA center where I'd just finished a workshop on career transitions for female veterans. I was carrying a box of folders when I saw her standing awkwardly next to a potted fern in a beige trench coat, like she'd stepped out of someone else's life and into mine. Jane, she said, voice small. I walked past her. Wait, please, just give me 5 minutes. I stopped. Not because I wanted to hear her out, but because I needed to see it for myself. That after all this time, she could finally be the one left speechless? She followed me to the parking lot. No cameras, no audience, just her and me and a sky the color of ash. I didn't expect you to fight back, she said quietly. I turned, slowly. That's your apology? You're sorry I didn't stay broken? She flinched, then looked down. I was scared, she admitted. You were always so strong. Even when we were kids. I was the pretty one, the loved one, but you were everything I wasn't, and I hated you for it. I stared at her, stunned not by the words, but by the sudden nakedness in her voice. No performance, no costume, just a confession. I kept thinking if I tore you down, I could finally be enough, she whispered, for Mom, for Dad, for me. A wind swept through the parking lot, rustling the trees above us. I'm sorry, she said, and for the first time in my life, I saw her cry. Not pretty tears, not the kind that win sympathy, but real ones. Ugly, raw, honest. She reached into her coat and handed me something. A small photo, wrinkled, faded, of us as kids, both in pigtails, standing in the backyard. She's grinning. I'm holding a mud pie. Our grandfather stands behind us, hands on both our shoulders. I found it in his drawer, she said. He kept it all those years. I looked at it, then back at her. I don't need this, I said. She nodded. I know. Then she left. No begging, no more offers. Just walked away, shoulders slumped. My father's apology came later. It wasn't words, it was action. One morning, I received a thick envelope from his attorney. Inside, a signed affidavit admitting to the forged power of attorney and the unauthorized sale of my house. No denial, no blame shifting, just the facts. Clean, precise, legal. It was his way of saying, I did this, and I can't undo it, but I won't lie anymore. There was a note, too. Handwritten. I failed you. And I see that now. You didn't deserve any of this. No daughter does. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you find peace. It didn't make me cry, but it made me breathe easier. The weight in my chest lifted just slightly. The court case didn't last long. The evidence was overwhelming. Claire settled. The estate was returned to me. Assets unfrozen. Accounts corrected. Titles transferred. In the final moments, the judge looked at me and asked if I had anything to say. I stood, looked across the courtroom at the people who had once been my entire world, and I said, there's no victory in this, only truth, and the hope that none of us ever make silence an excuse again. The gavel fell. It was done. People imagine revenge is sweet, that it's loud, fiery, cinematic, but mine wasn't like that. It was quiet, methodical, surgical, and it left behind a silence that was not empty, but full of endings and beginnings. The phone calls stopped after that, the invitations, the letters, but every once in a while I'd see Claire's name pop up in local articles, fundraisers, small design events, always smiling, always curated. We hadn't spoken since the courthouse. I didn't need to, because some apologies come too late. Not because you didn't want them, but because you finally reached the place where you no longer needed them. And that's a kind of freedom no one can take away. I never needed their love. Anyway, the sun was rising when I stepped onto the porch of the house that had once been stolen from me. My house. The air smelled like pine and the promise of something new. I stood there barefoot, coffee in hand, the floorboards warm beneath my soles, and let myself feel it. This strange, quiet thing called peace. It didn't come with a parade. There were no headlines, no Instagram stories, no grand gestures. Just the wind moving gently through the trees and the sound of my own breathing. This place had once held ghosts, memories I couldn't bear to touch. the chair my grandfather used to sit in with his pipe, the scratch on the wall from the time Claire pushed me down the stairs, the dent in the kitchen table from the medal I slammed down the day they ignored my promotion, but now it held something else. Me. The real me. Not the version they painted in whispers and omissions, not the caricature they created to justify their betrayal. Not the silent girl at the dinner table who kept her hands in her lap and her opinions to herself. I had let that version die, buried her beside every unanswered letter and unopened gift I ever sent, and in her place stood someone stronger, someone whole. The court case hadn't given me closure. Closure came slowly, in quiet moments, in morning jogs without purpose, in folding laundry while humming old war songs my grandfather once sang under his breath, in serving breakfast to veterans who had nowhere else to go, men and women who saw me not as the estranged daughter, but as one of them. I had started a small non-profit in the months after the trial, the Quiet Table, a place where vets could gather, no questions, no ranks, just warm food and a seat for anyone who needed to feel human again. Some mornings we'd have 5 people, other days 30. And every single face reminded me that the things I built on my own, without my family, meant more than any inheritance ever could. One morning, an older man in a faded army jacket looked at me and said, "You're the girl from the papers, right? The one who stood up to her family?" I nodded. He smiled, slow and knowing. "Damn proud of you." That was all he said. That was all I needed. Because pride from strangers can sometimes mean more than love from those who never truly saw you. I kept the letter from my father, folded neatly in the bottom drawer of my desk, not because I forgave him, but because it reminded me how far I'd come, that even the ones who break you can one day admit they were wrong. But forgiveness? That's not a door I ever reopened. Some things are better left sealed. Claire Child wants to reconnect. Sent an invitation to her wedding. No note, just my name on the envelope, like she thought I'd show up and let her perform redemption in front of her guests. I tossed it in the trash without opening it, not because I hated her, but because I didn't owe her an audience. Love, I've learned, is not always healing. Sometimes it's toxic, conditional, transactional, and the real power doesn't come from reclaiming it. It comes from realizing you never needed it in the first place. I spent too many years trying to earn a seat at a table that was always meant to be out of reach. Now, I build my own table every week, and the people who sit there, they stay not because they have to, but because they choose to. Family isn't blood. It's who shows up, who listens when you speak, who stands with you when the storm hits. And when I look at the life I've rebuilt, brick by brick, scar by scar, I don't see the girl who was erased. I see the woman who walked through fire and kept walking. I see the survivor who refused to become bitter, the soldier who chose purpose over revenge, the daughter who became her own legacy. So if you're out there, sitting in silence, waiting to be seen, let this be your proof. You don't need their love to be whole. You only need your own. Because once you choose yourself, truly, honestly, without apology, no one can ever take that from you again. Not even the people who gave you your name. Not even the ones who tried to bury it. They tried to erase me. And now, I'm written in ink. Permanent, untouchable, free.